The police officer was just walking past the building when something unusual caught his attention. At first, it seemed like an ordinary scene. Two young girls were sitting quietly on a concrete bench outside. Both had red hair, their heads lowered, their faces filled with tears. But then, the officer noticed something that made him stop instantly. He took a closer look at the older girl, and suddenly his expression changed. In that moment, he realized something wasn't right at all. What he saw next made his heart race, and within seconds he knew he might have to call for help. What the officer discovered that day would leave everyone shocked. Chapter 1. The Bench. Before we dive into this story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And now, let's begin. Officer Daniel Harper had seen a lot in 30 years on the force. He had seen families fall apart in slow motion. He had seen good people make terrible choices. He had seen children grow up too fast in houses where hope ran out before the groceries did. After 3 decades of walking these streets, Daniel thought nothing could surprise him anymore. He was wrong. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late October, the kind of day where the sky can't decide between gray and blue, and the wind carries just enough chill to remind you that winter is coming. Daniel was driving his usual patrol route through the older part of Millhaven, a small town in the Midwest that most maps didn't bother to label anymore. He passed the hardware store that had been closing for 5 years but somehow never closed. He passed the diner where old Mr. Calloway still sat every morning with his decaf and his newspaper. He passed the public library, the post office, the little park with the broken fountain that the city kept promising to fix. And then he saw them. 2 girls, sitting on a concrete bench outside the community center. Something made him slow down. Not a sound, not a movement, just something quiet and heavy in the air around them that didn't feel right. He pulled the car over and looked closer. The older one looked to be around 14. She was sitting very still, her arms wrapped around herself, her eyes fixed on the ground. Her face was pale, and even from a distance, Daniel could see the dried tracks of tears on her cheeks. Beside her sat a little girl, no more than 4 years old. Her eyes were red and swollen. She was holding the older girl's hand with both of hers, like she was afraid that if she let go, something terrible would happen. Daniel stepped out of the car slowly. He had learned long ago that the way you approach a child matters more than anything you say, so he kept his voice low and his hands visible, and he walked toward them the way you walk toward something fragile. "Hey there," he said gently. "You two doing okay?" The older girl looked up. Her eyes were sharp, not the eyes of someone who was simply sad. They were the eyes of someone who had been watching out for herself for a long time. She didn't answer right away. She just studied him, measuring whether he was safe. The little one pressed closer to her sister. Daniel crouched down so he wasn't towering over them. "My name is Daniel," he said. "I'm not here to scare you. I just want to make sure you're all right." A long pause. Then the older girl spoke. "We're fine," she said quietly, but her voice cracked on the last word. Daniel nodded slowly. He didn't push. He just stayed there, patient, letting the silence do its work. After a moment, he asked the question that seemed the most natural in the world. "Where's your mom?" The little girl looked up at her sister. The older girl looked down at the ground. And then, in a voice so small it almost disappeared into the wind, she said the words that stopped Daniel Harper completely cold. She said she'd come back. Yesterday. Daniel didn't move. He didn't speak. He just let those words settle over him like a weight. Yesterday. He looked at the 2 girls again, really looked at them this time. No coats, even in the October chill. No bags, no snacks, no phone, no adult anywhere in sight. And the thing that hit him hardest wasn't just that they were alone. It was that they didn't seem surprised by it. They weren't panicking. They weren't screaming for help. They were just waiting, quietly, patiently, as if this wasn't the first time the world had forgotten about them. Daniel felt something shift inside his chest. In 30 years, he had responded to hundreds of calls. But this, 2 children sitting on a bench waiting for someone who didn't come, this was different. He looked at the older girl and asked her name. She hesitated for just a moment. Then she said quietly, "Emily." And the little one looked up with her red, tired eyes and whispered, "I'm Lily." Daniel nodded. He looked at Emily, really looked at her, and for the first time he noticed something she had been trying to hide beneath her oversized jacket. His expression didn't change, but his heart did, because Daniel Harper suddenly understood that this was not a simple case, and that whatever came next was going to change everything. How many hours had those two girls been sitting on that bench? And what was Emily hiding that she wasn't ready to say out loud? The answers, and the truth about what happened to their mother, begin in Chapter 2. Chapter 2. Names and Silence. Daniel didn't rush. That was the first thing he had learned, a long time ago, when it came to children who had been let down by adults. If you moved too fast, they closed like a door. If you pushed too hard, they stopped talking altogether. So he simply stayed where he was, crouched down to their level, and let the moment breathe. "Emily," he said softly, "how long have you two been sitting here?" She didn't answer right away. She looked down at Lily, then back at the ground. Her jaw tightened slightly, the way someone's does when they're deciding how much of the truth to give away. "A while," she said finally. Daniel nodded like that was a perfectly normal answer. "Are you hungry?" Lily looked up immediately. It was the fastest she had moved since he arrived. She didn't say anything, but her eyes said everything. Emily put a gentle hand on her sister's knee. "We're okay," Emily said, but her voice was thin, like paper held up to the light. Daniel stood slowly and walked back to his patrol car. He kept the door open so they could see exactly what he was doing. He reached into the back seat and pulled out 2 granola bars and a bottle of water he kept for long shifts. He walked back and held them out without making it a big moment. "I always carry too many of these," he said simply. "Do me a favor and take them." Lily looked at Emily. Emily looked at Daniel. Then slowly she took them and handed 1 bar directly to her sister before taking anything for herself. Daniel noticed that. He noticed everything. He sat down on the far end of the bench, leaving space between them, and looked out at the street like he had all the time in the world. "You don't have to tell me anything you don't want to," he said quietly. "But I'm not leaving until I know you're safe. That's just how I work." A long silence passed. Lily chewed her granola bar with both hands wrapped around it. Emily stared at the sidewalk. Then, without looking at him, Emily spoke. "Her name is Lily. She's 4. A pause. "I'm Emily. I'm 14. "It's good to meet you both," Daniel said. Officially. Something almost softened in Emily's expression. Not a smile, but close. "You're not going to call someone right away?" she asked. There was something careful in the question, like she had already played out in her mind what happened when adults made phone calls. "I'm going to make sure you're both safe first," Daniel said. "That's my only job right now." Emily studied him for a long moment. Then she looked away. "Most people just call and then leave," she said quietly. Daniel didn't respond to that right away. He let it sit, because he knew she wasn't saying it to be dramatic. She was saying it because it was true, because it had happened before. Lily finished her granola bar and leaned her head against Emily's arm. Within minutes, exhaustion pulled her eyes closed. Emily watched her sister sleep with an expression that was too old for her face. Too careful, too familiar with the weight of responsibility. Daniel watched them both and felt the question forming in his mind, the one he needed to ask, but carefully. "Emily," he said gently, "is there anyone I can call? A neighbor? A family friend? Anyone?" She shook her head slowly. "There's no one," she said, and it wasn't said with sadness. It was said with the flat certainty of someone who had already checked every option a long time ago. Daniel nodded. He looked at the 2 girls, one asleep, one carrying the weight of the world on her young shoulders, and made a quiet decision. He wasn't going anywhere, and somewhere in the back of his mind, a thought was beginning to form. Something about the way Emily sat, the way she moved, the way she held herself carefully, like someone protecting something fragile. He hadn't said anything yet, but he had noticed. And tomorrow, everything Emily had been hiding would start to come to the surface. Chapter 3. The House on Mercer Street. The address wasn't hard to find. Emily had given it to him quietly, almost reluctantly, like she was handing over something she wasn't sure she'd get back. Daniel had arranged for a kind female officer named Rosa to stay with the girls at the community center while he drove over to take a look. He told himself it was routine. By the time he turned onto Mercer Street, he already knew it wasn't. The house sat at the end of a tired block. It wasn't the worst house on the street, but it had the look of a place that had been slowly losing a fight for a long time. The front porch sagged on one side. The curtains in the window were drawn tight, even in the afternoon. The grass had gone brown and nobody had raked the leaves that covered the front path like a thick, forgotten carpet. Daniel stepped out of the car and stood still for a moment. Quiet. Too quiet. He knocked on the door. No answer. He knocked again. Louder. Nothing. He tried the handle. The door was unlocked. He pushed it open slowly and stepped inside. The first thing he noticed was the smell. Not dangerous. Not alarming. Just the stale, still smell of a place where the windows hadn't been opened in weeks. The kind of smell that settles into a house when life inside it has slowed almost to a stop. The living room was dim. A lamp with no bulb. A couch with a folded blanket on one end. Small enough to be Lily's. A television that looked like it hadn't been turned on in a long time. Daniel moved through the room slowly. The kitchen told more of the story. A few cans on the shelf. A nearly empty box of crackers. The refrigerator held almost nothing. A bottle of ketchup. Some leftover rice in a bowl covered with plastic wrap. A carton of juice that was nearly empty. He stood in the middle of that kitchen and thought about two girls living here. About what it meant to open that refrigerator every morning and make it work somehow. Then something on the wall caught his eye. A calendar. Handwritten. Every single day marked with small, careful notes in pencil. Grocery list. Lily's breakfast. School day. Stayed home. Crackers and juice. Last of the bread. Daniel stepped closer. The entries went back months. Written in the same careful handwriting throughout. Young but precise. Determined. He followed the calendar forward day by day, until he reached the last entry. It was from 4 days ago. It said simply, "She didn't come home." Daniel stood very still. He looked around the kitchen again, at the careful, stubborn effort written into every corner of that small space. Someone had been holding this house together with nothing but willpower and love, and that someone was 14 years old. He walked down the short hallway. One bedroom had a mattress on the floor with 2 pillows side by side, Emily and Lily sharing the same small space. A stuffed rabbit sat propped against the wall. Beside it, a small stack of library books, neatly arranged. In the corner of the room, on a low shelf, he saw it. A notebook. Old, its cover soft from handling. A rubber band holding it closed. Daniel picked it up carefully. He turned it over in his hands. He didn't open it. Not yet. That wasn't his story to read without permission. But he held it for a moment, feeling the weight of it, knowing somehow that whatever was inside those pages held more truth about Emily's life than any report ever could. He set it gently in a small bag along with a few of Lily's things. The stuffed rabbit, the library books, a clean change of clothes for both girls. He walked back through the house one last time. At the door he paused and looked back at the calendar on the wall. All those days. All those careful marks. Child, counting and planning and holding on. Daniel stepped outside into the October air and stood on that broken porch for a long moment, before walking back to his car. He had seen a lot of things in 30 years, but that calendar was going to stay with him for a long time. Daniel found something in that house that changed how he saw everything, but the biggest revelation is still ahead, because Emily has been keeping a secret that she's never told anyone. And in Chapter 4, she finally begins to let her guard down. Chapter 4. The weight she carried. Daniel returned to the community center as the afternoon light was fading. Rosa met him at the door with a quiet look that said everything was calm, but fragile. Lily had fallen asleep on a small couch in the corner. The stuffed rabbit Daniel had brought tucked under her arm. Emily sat beside her, upright, watching the door, watching for him. When she saw the bag in his hand, something in her shoulders relaxed just slightly. He had brought their things. He had come back. Daniel set the bag down gently beside her and took a seat across from the 2 girls. Not too close, just present. "I brought Lily's rabbit," he said quietly. Emily looked at the bag, then at him. "You didn't go through our stuff?" "Just enough to bring what you needed," he said. "Nothing more." She nodded slowly. It wasn't gratitude exactly. It was something more careful than that. It was the recognition that he had respected a boundary she hadn't even had to say out loud. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Emily surprised him. "She likes to hold it when she sleeps," she said softly, nodding toward Lily and the rabbit. "She's had it since she was a baby. I used to tell her it was magic, that it kept bad dreams away." Daniel smiled gently. "Did she believe you?" "She still does," Emily said. And for just a moment, something young and tired passed across her face. Daniel let the silence sit for a moment before speaking again. Emily, you don't have to tell me everything, but can you help me understand a little bit about your days? Just so I know how to help. She looked at him for a long moment, measuring. Then she started to talk. It came out slowly at first, like water finding its way through cracks in stone. She talked about mornings, waking up before Lily so she could figure out what there was to eat before her sister asked. She talked about making crackers feel like a real breakfast by arranging them on a plate and adding a little peanut butter when there was any left. She talked about telling Lily that the lights were out because the electricity company was doing repairs on the street. She talked about bedtime stories, how she made them up every night. Long, detailed stories about a little girl who could talk to animals and lived in a forest full of light. She said Lily would always fall asleep before the story ended, and she would sit there in the dark for a while after, just listening to her breathe. Daniel listened without moving. He didn't write anything down. He didn't reach for his radio. He just listened. The way you listen when you understand that someone is giving you something rare and fragile. The truth, offered carefully, for the very first time. You've been taking care of her for a long time, he said quietly. Not a question. Emily looked down at her hands. Since I was 10, she said simply. 4 years. Daniel let that number settle over him. 4 years of a child raising a child. 4 years of making something out of nothing day after day, with no one watching and no one helping. What about school? He asked gently. Emily was quiet for a moment. I stopped going a few months ago, she said. It was too hard to leave Lily. The neighbor who used to watch her moved away, and I couldn't find anyone else. She paused. I didn't want her to be alone. Daniel nodded slowly. No judgment in his face. No reaction that would make her close back up. Then Emily said something that she seemed to say without fully meaning to, like it slipped out from somewhere deep and unguarded. I never told anyone because I thought they'd take her away from me. The room was very still. Daniel looked at this 14-year-old girl, exhausted, careful, fiercely protective, and understood something clearly. Emily had not been trying to hide trouble. She had been trying to hold the only thing that mattered to her together with both hands. And she had done it alone for 4 years, without anyone ever stopping to ask if she was okay. He looked at her gently and said, I'm asking now. Emily looked up. Her eyes were glassy, but she didn't let herself cry. She just nodded. And somehow, that small nod was one of the most courageous things Daniel Harper had ever seen. Emily is finally beginning to open up, but the secret she's been carrying, the one that changes everything, is still just beneath the surface. In Chapter 5, it finally comes out, and nothing will be the same after that. Chapter 5. Something she's been hiding. The community center had grown quiet. Rosa had stepped out to make a few calls, and Lily was still sleeping soundly in the corner, her small hand wrapped around the stuffed rabbit. The room held that particular stillness that only comes late in the afternoon, when the world outside slows down, and the light turns soft and golden through the windows. Daniel sat across from Emily with a cup of water he had brought for her. She hadn't touched it yet. She was looking at her sister. She did that a lot, Daniel had noticed. Even in the middle of a conversation, her eyes would drift back to Lily, checking, making sure, confirming that she was still there and still safe. It was the habit of someone who had learned that the people you love can disappear without warning. Emily, Daniel said gently, can I ask you something? She turned to look at him. How are you feeling, physically, I mean? Something shifted in her expression. It was subtle, just a slight tension around her eyes, a barely visible tightening of her jaw. But Daniel had spent 30 years reading people, and he saw it clearly. She knew what he was asking, or at least she was afraid he did. I'm fine, she said. The words came out a little too quickly. Daniel didn't push. He just waited. Silence stretched between them, gentle but persistent. And then Emily looked down at her hands, folded in her lap, and she took a slow, careful breath. You already noticed, she said quietly. It wasn't a question. I wasn't sure, Daniel said honestly. I didn't want to assume. Another long pause. Outside, a car passed on the street. Lily stirred slightly in her sleep and then went still again. I haven't told anyone, Emily said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Not a single person. How long have you known? Daniel asked softly. She thought for a moment. A few months, she said. Maybe more. Daniel kept his expression calm and open. Inside, His heart was heavy with the weight of what she was carrying. Not just the responsibility of Lily, not just the absence of her mother, but this too. All of it. Alone. All of it in silence. "Have you seen a doctor at all?" he asked. She shook her head. "I was scared," she said. "I thought if I went to a hospital, they would ask questions. And then they would find out about Lily, and then—" She stopped, swallowed. "I couldn't let that happen." Daniel leaned forward slightly, his elbows on his knees, his voice steady and low. "Emily, you did what you thought you had to do to protect your sister. I understand that. But right now, I need you to let me help protect both of you." She looked at him with those careful, tired eyes. "If I go to the hospital," she said slowly, "what happens to Lily?" It was the only question that mattered to her. Not what happens to me. Not what happens to the baby. Only, what happens to Lily? Daniel chose his next words with great care. "I can't promise you that everything will stay exactly the same," he said honestly. "But I can promise you that I will fight to keep you two together. Every step of the way. You have my word." Emily studied his face for a long moment. People had made promises to her before. Adults had said words and then disappeared. She had learned, the hard way more than once, that words were easy and follow-through was rare. But something in Daniel's voice was different. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was simply steady, the way a door frame is steady, something you can lean against when the floor feels uncertain. Lily stirred again in the corner and murmured something soft in her sleep. Emily looked over at her, and her expression did something complicated and quiet. Then she looked back at Daniel. "Okay," she said, just that one word, but it carried the weight of every hard thing she had ever had to decide alone. Daniel nodded slowly. "We'll go together," he said, "and I'll be right there the whole time." He reached for his radio, and as he did, Emily wrapped her arms around herself gently and looked back at her sleeping sister one more time. She was scared, but for the first time in a very long time, she wasn't completely alone in that fear. Emily has finally let someone in. But the moment they step outside that community center, the world gets much more complicated, because Daniel is about to discover that this family didn't just fall through the cracks. They were failed, quietly and repeatedly, by an entire town. Chapter 6 reveals the truth that nobody wanted to see. Chapter 6, What the Town Never Saw. Daniel made 2 calls before they left the community center. The first was to arrange safe, temporary care for the girls, while he spent the next hour doing something he felt he had to do before anything else moved forward. He needed to understand how this had happened, not for a report, not for a file, but because in 30 years of walking these streets, he had never felt quite this particular weight, the weight of a question that had no clean answer. How had 2 children been this invisible for this long, in a town this small? His first stop was Millhaven Elementary. The secretary recognized Lily's name immediately, which told Daniel something right away. He asked to speak with whoever knew the family best. A few minutes later, a soft-spoken teacher named Mrs. Galvez sat across from him in a small office that smelled like crayons and old coffee. She folded her hands on the table and looked at him with tired, guilty eyes. "I wondered," she said quietly, "more than once. But you didn't report it," Daniel said. "Not as an accusation, just as a fact." Mrs. Galvez looked down. "I filled out a concern form about 8 months ago," she said. "Lily was coming in without lunch, wearing the same clothes several days in a row, but she was always clean, always sweet, and her sister always picked her up on time." She paused. "I told myself someone else was handling it." Daniel wrote nothing down. He just listened. "The form," he said. "What happened to it?" Mrs. Galvez pressed her lips together. "I don't know," she said softly. His second stop was the county social services office. A tired administrator named Mr. Foss pulled up the family's file on his computer with the slow, careful movements of someone who already knew what he was about to find. The file existed. That was something, but it was thin. A concern logged months ago. A follow-up visit scheduled and then rescheduled. A note saying no answer at the door. Another note saying case monitored. Monitored. Daniel looked at that word for a long moment. "How many cases does one worker carry here?" he asked. Mr. Foss rubbed the back of his neck. "Right now, somewhere between 60 and 80, he said. "We're understaffed, have been for years." Daniel nodded slowly. He didn't raise his voice. There was no point. This wasn't a story about villains. It was a story about a system stretched so thin that children fell through the gaps not because anyone wanted them to, but because nobody had enough hands to catch them all. His last stop was a neighbor, an older woman named Mrs. Patton, who lived 2 houses down from Mercer Street. She opened the door before he even knocked. She had seen his car pull up. She knew why he was there. "I brought them food twice," she said immediately, like she needed him to know that. "Last winter I left a bag on the porch, and once in the spring." "Did you ever call anyone?" Daniel asked gently. Mrs. Patton was quiet for a moment. "I didn't want to get involved," she said finally. "I thought maybe it wasn't as bad as it looked. I thought maybe I was being nosy." She looked at him with watery eyes. "I thought someone else would do something." Daniel thanked her and walked back to his car. He sat behind the wheel for a long moment without starting the engine. A teacher who filed a form that disappeared. A system too overloaded to follow through. A neighbor who left food on a porch but never made a call. And a police officer who had driven past that house on Mercer Street more times than he could count. He thought about that calendar on the wall. All those careful days marked in pencil. A 14-year-old girl, counting and managing and holding on, while the town went about its business, while everyone assumed someone else was paying attention. Daniel started the car. He couldn't change what had already happened, but he could change what happened next. And starting tomorrow, he was going to make absolutely sure that Emily and Lily did not fall through any more gaps. Not on his watch. Daniel now understands how the system failed these girls. But the hardest moments are still ahead, because in Chapter 7, it's not Emily who stops Daniel in his tracks. It's 4-year-old Lily, with one simple question that he doesn't know how to answer. Chapter 7. Lily speaks. The next morning came in gray and soft. Daniel had barely slept. He had sat at his kitchen table until well past midnight, a cold cup of coffee in front of him, turning the case over in his mind the way you turn a stone in your hand, looking for something solid to hold on to. He had seen hard things before. He had worked cases that stayed with him for years, but there was something about Emily and Lily that was different. Something that had gotten past the professional distance he had spent 3 decades building. Maybe it was the calendar. Maybe it was the notebook he still hadn't opened. Maybe it was simply the way Lily had held the stuffed rabbit when she finally fell asleep, both arms wrapped around it like it was the most important thing in the world. He arrived at the temporary care facility early, before the morning routine had fully started. Rosa met him at the entrance with a small smile. "Lily was up before 6, she said quietly. "She asked for Emily 3 times before breakfast." Daniel nodded. "And Emily?" "Didn't sleep much," Rosa said. "But she's calm. She's been reading to Lily since 7. He found them in a small common room near the window. Emily was sitting on a low chair with Lily pressed against her side, a picture book open across both their laps. Emily was reading in a low, steady voice, a story about a bear family and a long winter journey, and Lily was listening with her whole body, the way small children do when a story has caught them completely. Daniel stood in the doorway for a moment without announcing himself. He wanted to remember this. The light through the window, Emily's voice, quiet and sure, Lily's small hand resting on the page. Then Lily looked up and saw him. Her face did something immediate and uncomplicated. It opened, the way a child's face opens when they see someone they've decided to trust. "You came back," she said. "I told you I would," Daniel said, stepping into the room. Emily looked up from the book. She gave him a small nod, the kind that meant she had noticed he was on time, that she had been watching for him, that it mattered. He pulled a chair over and sat down near them, not in their space, just close enough to be present. Lily studied him for a moment with those wide, serious eyes. Then she asked her question. It came out simply, the way children ask the things that adults spend years tiptoeing around. "Are you going to take Emily away?" The room went very quiet. Daniel felt the question land somewhere deep in his chest. He looked at Lily, 4 years old, red-eyed, clutching her rabbit, and then at Emily, who had gone very still beside her. Emily wasn't looking at Daniel. She was looking at Lily. And the expression on her face was the most heartbreaking thing Daniel had seen in 30 years of this work. Not fear for herself, not anger, just a fierce, exhausted love, the kind that would do anything, endure anything, to keep this small person from being hurt. Daniel leaned forward gently, his elbows on his knees. "No," he said carefully. "I'm not here to take anyone away. I'm here to help." Lily considered this. "Promise?" she asked. Daniel looked at her for a moment. "I promise I'm going to do everything I can," he said. "Every single thing." Lily seemed to measure the weight of those words in the way only very young children can, without filters, without cynicism, with a pure and complete attention. Then she nodded once, satisfied, and she leaned across Emily's lap and picked up the picture book again. "You can listen too," she said to Daniel. "We're at the part where the Bear family finds the river." Emily let out a breath that was almost a small laugh. Daniel reached over and accepted the corner of the book that Lily held out to him, and for a few quiet minutes, the three of them sat by the window while the gray morning light grew slowly brighter. It was a small moment, ordinary even, but Daniel carried it with him for the rest of the day, because he understood something now that no report had ever told him. These two girls were not a case. They were a family, and families deserve to stay together. That small, peaceful morning is about to be interrupted, because Daniel has just received word about something that changes the entire picture, a discovery about the girl's mother that nobody expected. Chapter 8 reveals a truth that makes everything more complicated and more human than Daniel ever anticipated. Chapter 8, A Name from the Past. The call came just after noon. Daniel was in the parking lot of the care facility, finishing a sandwich he hadn't tasted, when his phone buzzed on the seat beside him. It was a colleague from the neighboring town of Carver Falls, a deputy named Mills who Daniel had known for years. "Hey," Mills said, "you work in a case involving two girls from Millhaven? Sisters?" Daniel sat up straighter. "I am," he said. "Why?" A short pause. "We had a woman brought into Carver Falls General 3 days ago," Mills said carefully. "No ID on her at first. They just got a match this morning. Her name is Sandra Calloway. She listed a Millhaven address." Daniel was already reaching for his notepad. "How is she?" he asked. Another pause. Longer this time. "She's stable now," Mills said. "But it was close. She's been in the hospital since Sunday. She couldn't have called anyone even if she'd wanted to." Daniel set down his pen. He sat with that for a moment. Sunday. Emily had said her mother told them she'd come back yesterday, which meant Sandra had left the house, made it to Carver Falls somehow, and ended up in a hospital bed, while her daughter sat on a bench in the October cold and waited. "Does she know about the girls?" Daniel asked. "Not yet," Mills said. "She's been in and out. She's more coherent today, but she's fragile. I wanted to check with you before anyone said anything to her." "I appreciate that," Daniel said. "Don't tell her anything yet. Let me figure out the right way to handle this." He thanked Mills and ended the call. Then he sat in that parking lot for a long time. This changed things, not in the practical sense. Emily and Lily still needed care, still needed stability, still needed a plan. The situation on the ground hadn't shifted, but it changed the story, because Sandra Calloway was not simply a mother who had walked away from her children. She was a woman who had been struggling with something much heavier than she could carry, and she had collapsed under the weight of it, alone, in a town 20 miles away. Daniel had seen this before, not often, but enough times to know that the picture was rarely as simple as it first appeared. People didn't stop being human just because they made terrible choices, and sometimes the most complicated cases weren't about bad people. They were about broken people who needed help, just as much as the children they had failed. The harder question was Emily. At some point, soon, she would need to know, and Daniel had no idea how she would receive it. Emily had spent months holding everything together, protecting Lily, carrying the silence alone. She had reasons to be angry. She had every right to feel abandoned. But she also had a mother who was lying in a hospital bed 40 minutes away, asking no one for anything, because she didn't think anyone would come. Daniel walked back inside. Emily was helping Lily with a small puzzle at the activity table. She looked up when he came in, reading his face the way she always did, quickly and carefully. "Something happened," she said. It wasn't a question. Daniel pulled a chair close and sat down. "I have some news," he said quietly. "And I want to tell you honestly, because I think you deserve that." Emily put down the puzzle piece in her hand. She folded her hands in her lap and looked at him with those steady, careful eyes. Daniel told her. He kept it simple. He kept it calm. He told her that her mother had been found, that she was safe, that she was in a hospital not far away, and that she was going to be okay. He watched Emily's face move through something complicated and private, a storm of feelings that she pressed down, one by one, with a control that no 14-year-old should have needed to develop. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked down at Lily, who was still focused on the puzzle, happily unaware. "Is she going to come back?" Emily asked softly. Daniel answered her honestly. "I don't know yet," he said, "but she's alive. And right now, that's what matters most." Emily nodded slowly. She picked up the puzzle piece again, turned it in her fingers. "Okay," she said quietly. "Just okay." But Daniel heard everything that one word was holding together. Emily now knows the truth about her mother. But the hardest part of this journey is still ahead. In Chapter 9, Daniel finally opens the notebook, and what he finds inside will change the way he sees everything. Chapter 9. The notebook. Emily gave him permission that evening. It happened quietly, without ceremony. Daniel had stopped by after his shift to check on the girls, and as he was getting ready to leave, Emily looked up from the small table where she had been sitting and said, "The notebook, you can read it." Daniel looked at her. "You sure?" he asked. She nodded once. Her eyes were steady. "I want someone to know," she said simply, "what it was really like." Daniel took the notebook home that night. He made himself a cup of tea he didn't drink, sat down at the kitchen table under the single overhead light, and carefully removed the rubber band. He opened to the first page. It wasn't a diary. He had half expected the private thoughts of a teenager, fears, hopes, the ordinary interior life of a young person finding her way. But that was not what Emily had written. The first several pages were lists. Grocery lists written in careful columns with prices noted beside each item. Calculations in the margins. Small, precise arithmetic, working out how far a small amount of money could stretch across a week. Items circled, items crossed out. Substitutions noted. Bread, 189s, crackers instead, 0 by 99, saves 0.90. Lily's vitamins, almost gone. Ask Mrs. Patton? Daniel turned the pages slowly. There were schedules. Lily's morning routine written out step by step, as if Emily had needed to plan it carefully to make sure nothing was forgotten. What time Lily needed to wake up, what she would eat, what she would wear. Small notes about Lily's preferences. She won't eat eggs if they're too soft. She likes her juice with a little water mixed in. She always wants the blue cup, not the red one. A child, documenting another child's life with the thoroughness of someone who understood that the details were everything. Daniel turned more pages. Drawings appeared between the lists. Simple pencil sketches, a house with a garden, a big tree with a tire swing, two figures holding hands beneath a bright sun. Lily had drawn some of them, the lines loose and joyful, but others were clearly Emily's. More careful, more detailed. A way of giving her sister beautiful things, even when the real world couldn't provide them. He found a page where Emily had written out, in full, one of the bedtime stories she had invented for Lily, the one about the girl who could talk to animals and lived in a forest full of light. It was 3 pages long, detailed, warm, full of small, specific joys. A rabbit who sang old songs, a river that tasted like apples, a cave where it always smelled like fresh bread. Daniel read every word of it. He had to stop once in the middle and look up at the ceiling for a moment. Near the back of the notebook, the tone shifted. The lists became shorter. The handwriting, always careful, grew slightly smaller, as if Emily was conserving space or energy or both. There were fewer drawings, more blank pages, and then he found the page that Rosa had mentioned, the one Emily had written alone, in the quiet, when the weight had gotten too heavy to carry without putting some of it somewhere. It was near the last used page. At the top, written in letters slightly larger than the rest, "Things Lily likes so she doesn't get sad." And beneath it, a list. The rabbit story, warm crackers, the color yellow, when I do her hair in 2 braids, singing the bus song in the morning, when I let her pick the cup, watching clouds and making up names for them, when I tell her the stars are nightlights that belong to us. Daniel read the list twice. Then he closed the notebook. He sat at that kitchen table for a long time without moving. Outside, the night was quiet and cold. A dog barked somewhere down the street. A car passed. The refrigerator hummed. Daniel Harper, 30 years on the force, a man who had trained himself to stay steady in the middle of everything, pressed his hand flat on the cover of that notebook and looked out the dark window for a long, long moment. He wasn't embarrassed about what he felt. He just needed a minute. Because that list, that careful, loving, heartbreaking list of small things a big sister had memorized to keep her little sister from crying, was the most quietly heroic thing he had ever read in his life. Daniel now knows the full weight of what Emily has been carrying. But tomorrow the system steps in, and for the first time, Daniel faces the very real possibility that he might not be able to keep his promise. Chapter 10 is where everything gets harder. Chapter 10. Cracks in the System. The meeting was scheduled for 9 in the morning. Daniel had been in enough of these rooms to know what they looked like before he arrived. Fluorescent lights, a rectangular table, folders stacked in the center. People who were not unkind, but who had learned, out of necessity, out of self-protection, to keep a certain distance between themselves and the cases they managed. He understood that distance. He had worn it himself for years. But today he walked into that room without it. There were 3 people from the County Social Services office. A supervisor named Patricia Howe, who had been in the system longer than Daniel had been on the force, and who had the look of someone who had seen every possible outcome and still showed up every morning. Beside her sat a younger caseworker named Kevin Bright, with a new notepad, and the careful, slightly rigid manner of someone who followed protocol because he believed in it, not because it was easy. The third was a woman from the Family Court Liaison Office whose name Daniel didn't catch because she was already talking when he came in. They had the file open on the table. Daniel sat down, folded his hands, and listened. Patricia Howe spoke first. She was professional, measured, and thorough. She outlined the situation clearly. 2 minors in temporary care, one with pending medical needs, no available parent, no identified family members who could take custody. She explained what the standard protocol required in situations like this one. Emily would be placed in a supervised residential program for minors. Lily would be moved to a licensed foster placement. The baby, once born, would be assessed separately. Daniel kept his expression steady. Kevin Bright slid a form across the table. A placement summary, already half filled out. Everything neat. Everything in order. Everything absolutely, completely wrong. "I'd like to discuss alternatives," Daniel said. Patricia looked at him. "Officer Harper," she said, not unkindly. "The protocol exists to protect the children." "I understand that," Daniel said, "and I'm not arguing against protection. I'm arguing for a different way to deliver it." He leaned forward. "Emily is not a troubled teenager. She is a young woman who has been functioning as a primary caregiver for 4 years. Separating her from her sister right now, abruptly, without transition, will cause harm. I've seen it happen. You have too." Patricia was quiet for a moment. Kevin Bright looked at his notepad. "The residential program allows supervised sibling visits," he offered, in a tone that suggested he was trying to be helpful. "Supervised visits are not the same as being together," Daniel said. "Lily is 4 years old. Emily is the only consistent presence she has ever known. You put them in separate facilities, and you are telling that little girl in the clearest possible way that the one person she trusts has been taken away." The room was quiet. Daniel felt the weight of it, the particular silence of a room full of people who knew he was right, but were also holding folders full of regulations that said something different. Patricia Howe looked at the file, then at Daniel. "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked. Daniel had prepared for this. He spoke carefully and specifically. A temporary placement that could accommodate both girls together, with proper support. Medical care for Emily coordinated through the county program. A community-based support system rather than institutional separation. Kevin Bright was writing. Patricia was listening. But the liaison woman from Family Court looked up from her papers and said, in a flat, efficient voice, "The baby complicates things significantly. Depending on the assessment we may be required to pursue, let's not get ahead of ourselves," Daniel said quietly but firmly. "The baby hasn't arrived yet. Emily is receiving medical attention. Let's solve the problems in front of us before we create new ones." The liaison woman looked at him for a moment, then back at her papers. Patricia closed the folder in front of her. "I'll need 24 hours, she said, "to look at placement options and run this up the chain." Daniel nodded. "Thank you," he said. He picked up his hat from the table and stood, but as he walked toward the door, Patricia said his name. He turned. She looked at him with the eyes of someone who had been doing this work long enough to recognize something real when she saw it. "You really think she can do this?" she asked quietly. "Emily." Daniel didn't hesitate. "She's been doing it for 4 years, he said. "With nothing. Imagine what she could do with actual support." He walked out into the hallway, and for the first time since this began, he wasn't sure which way the next 24 hours would go. Daniel has made his case. But the system moves slowly, and Emily doesn't know how close things came to going a very different way. In Chapter 11, Daniel and Emily have the most honest conversation of the entire story, and Emily says something that Daniel will never forget. Chapter 11, The Longest Night. The facility was quiet by 8 o'clock. Lily had been bathed and fed and read to sleep by Emily, the same way it happened every night, the same way it had happened for years. The rabbit was tucked in beside her. The room was dim and warm. Emily came out into the small common area and found Daniel still there, sitting in one of the chairs by the window with his jacket over the back of the seat and a cup of vending machine coffee he hadn't touched. She sat down across from him without being asked. For a while they didn't speak. The silence between them had changed over the past several days. It was no longer the silence of strangers or the silence of someone deciding how much to trust. It was the silence of two people who had already said enough hard things that the quiet felt earned. "How did the meeting go?" Emily asked. "We're waiting on a decision," Daniel said honestly. "But I made the case for keeping you and Lily together. Patricia Howe is the one who decides, and I think she heard me." Emily nodded slowly, looking at her hands. "And if she says no?" she asked. "Then I make the case again," Daniel said. Louder. Something almost like a smile crossed Emily's face. Then it faded. "I keep thinking," she said quietly, "that I should have done something sooner, gone to someone sooner. But every time I thought about it, I just—" She stopped, started again. "I was so scared they'd split us up, so I just kept going, kept thinking I could handle it one more week." Daniel looked at her steadily. "You were 14, he said. "You were handling something that most adults would have struggled with. Don't carry blame that doesn't belong to you." Emily was quiet for a moment. Then she said something in a low voice, almost to herself, the kind of thing that comes out when someone is finally too tired to keep it inside. "I wasn't trying to be a good sister," she said. "I was just trying not to lose her." The room was very still. Daniel looked at this young woman, exhausted, honest, more self-aware than people twice her age, and felt the full weight of those words settle over him. Not trying to be heroic, just trying not to lose the one thing that mattered. He thought about all the forms in all the folders, all the protocols and assessments and placement summaries, all the official language that tried to describe human lives in clean, manageable terms. None of it came close to what Emily had just said in 11 words. "Can I tell you something?" Daniel said. Emily looked up. "I've made mistakes in this job," he said. "Cases where I moved too fast or not fast enough. Moments where I told myself something wasn't my business when it was." He paused. "I drove past your street more times than I can count." Emily looked at him carefully. "I'm not telling you that to make you feel sorry for me," he said. "I'm telling you because I want you to know that people can do better. Systems can do better." He looked at her steadily. "And you deserved better. A long time ago." Emily didn't respond right away. She looked out the dark window for a long moment. Then she said quietly, "No one ever said that to me before." Daniel nodded slowly. They sat together in the quiet for a little while longer. Two people, decades apart, carrying different weights, finding in that small common room on a cold night something that felt a great deal like understanding. The night has passed, and the morning brings something nobody expected, a gesture from the community that cracks everything open. Chapter 12 brings the first real light this story has seen. Chapter 12. Something unexpected. The call came the next morning at 7:45. Daniel was in his car outside the facility, drinking actual coffee this time when his phone rang. He didn't recognize the number but answered it anyway. "Officer Harper," said a voice on the other end. Warm, unhurried, with the particular steadiness of someone who had lived long enough to stop being rattled by hard things. "My name is Evelyn Marsh. I don't know if you remember me. I volunteer at the library on Tuesday mornings. You came in once about 3 years ago, about the after-school program. Daniel did remember her, vaguely. A tall woman with silver hair and reading glasses on a beaded chain. I remember, he said. What can I do for you, Mrs. Marsh? It's what I can do for you, she said. I heard about those two girls. Small town. Word gets around, even when it shouldn't. A brief pause. I have a spare room. 2, actually. I raised 4 children in that house, and it's been quiet for a long time. I'd like to offer it. Temporarily, officially, whatever the right word is. I just want to help. Daniel sat up straighter. Mrs. Marsh, he said carefully, do you understand the full situation? Emily is pregnant, yes, Evelyn said simply. I know. I'm 71 years old and I have seen a great deal of life. That doesn't frighten me. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Why? He asked. Not skeptically, genuinely. Evelyn was quiet for just a breath. Because I was taken from my sister when I was 6 years old, she said. We were put in separate homes. I didn't see her again for 11 years. A pause. I am not going to sit in my house with 2 empty rooms and let that happen to someone else if I can do anything about it. Daniel closed his eyes briefly. Of all the things he had expected that morning, it was not this. He brought the offer to Patricia Howe by 9 o'clock. Patricia read Evelyn's preliminary information carefully, asked several pointed questions, and then set the papers down and looked at Daniel with the measured expression of someone recalculating. She's already certified as a temporary foster contact from a previous case 6 years ago, Patricia said. Certification lapsed, but her record is clean. We can expedite a renewal. She paused. This would allow both girls to be placed together in a home environment, which addresses your primary concern. And the support services? Daniel asked. We would attach a caseworker, weekly visits, medical coordination for Emily. Patricia tapped the folder. It's not a permanent solution. It doesn't need to be permanent, Daniel said. It needs to be human. Right now, today, it needs to be human. Patricia looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up her pen. Daniel told Emily that afternoon. He sat across from her in the same chairs by the window and explained what had happened, who Evelyn was, what she had offered, why. Emily listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. She was separated from her sister, Emily asked. For 11 years, Daniel said. Emily looked down at her hands. Something moved across her face. Recognition, deep and wordless, the kind that doesn't need explaining because it lives below language. Does she have a garden? Emily asked quietly. Daniel blinked. I'm not sure, I can ask. Lily likes gardens, Emily said softly. She's never had one, but she draws them all the time. Daniel looked at this young woman, in the middle of everything, still thinking about what Lily would like. He felt something loosen in his chest. I'll find out, he said. Emily nodded. She looked toward the room where Lily was napping. Then she said almost to herself, maybe things can be okay. It was a small sentence, but in that room, on that morning, it was everything. A door has opened, but the hardest night is still coming. Because in Chapter 13, Daniel must fight one final battle inside a system that doesn't always make room for hope, and the outcome is not guaranteed. Chapter 13. The Decision. The final meeting took place on a Thursday. Same room, same fluorescent lights, same rectangular table. But this time the folder in the center was thicker, and there were more people around it. Patricia Howe sat at the head. Kevin Bright was beside her with his notepad. The family court liaison was back, and there was a new face, a woman named Dr. Simone Tate from the county's Young Mothers Support Program, who had reviewed Emily's case and requested to be present. Daniel sat on one side of the table. He had brought 2 things with him. A written statement he had prepared the night before, carefully and slowly, at his kitchen table, and the notebook, with Emily's permission, given that morning with a quiet nod. He didn't open either of them right away. He let the meeting begin. Patricia outlined the proposed plan methodically. Temporary placement of both girls with Evelyn Marsh, pending renewal of her foster certification, weekly caseworker visits, medical coordination through the county for Emily's prenatal care, enrollment in Dr. Tate's Young Mothers program upon the baby's arrival. Kevin Bright presented the logistics. Clean, thorough, specific. The family court liaison raised 3 concerns. Daniel answered each one steadily, without rushing, without raising his voice. Then the liaison raised a fourth. "There is still the question of long-term custody," she said. "Emily is a minor herself. The baby's situation will require a formal assessment. We cannot simply assume—" "No one is assuming anything," Daniel said calmly. "We are creating conditions under which Emily can demonstrate, with proper support, for the first time in her life, what she is capable of. That assessment you're describing will be far more meaningful in 6 months, after she has had real support, than it would be today." Dr. Tate spoke for the first time. "I've reviewed Emily's background," she said, in a clear and unhurried voice. "She has no history of behavioral issues. What she has is a history of extraordinary responsibility, under extraordinarily difficult circumstances. Girls like Emily, given proper support, consistently outperform expectations. I've seen it many times. I would like the opportunity to see it again." The liaison looked at her papers. The room was quiet. Daniel placed Emily's notebook on the table. He didn't say anything dramatic. He simply opened it to the page with the list, things Lily likes so she doesn't get sad, and slid it gently to the center of the table. Patricia Howe looked down at it. She read it slowly. Kevin Bright leaned slightly to read it too. His pen stopped moving. The liaison glanced at it and looked away quickly, but not quickly enough to hide the fact that it had reached her. The room stayed quiet for a long moment. Then Patricia Howe closed the notebook carefully and looked around the table. "I think we have enough to move forward," she said. The paperwork took 2 more hours. Daniel sat through every form, every signature line, every procedural step with the same steady patience he had carried through the entire week. Kevin Bright processed everything efficiently, and once or twice looked up at Daniel with an expression that was no longer rigid, just tired and genuine. "You didn't give up," Kevin said quietly, near the end. "Neither did Emily," Daniel said. He called her from the parking lot. When she answered, her voice was careful and braced, the voice of someone who had learned to prepare for disappointment. "It's done," Daniel said. "You and Lily are going to Evelyn's together." A long silence, then a sound that Daniel had not heard from Emily before. Not words, not a thank you, just a breath, released slowly, fully, like something that had been held for a very long time finally being let go. Daniel sat in his car and listened to it, and thought that it was one of the finest sounds he had ever heard. The plan is in place, but one more moment is coming, the one that changes everything for the last time. Chapter 14 brings the night Daniel has been preparing for, and the words Emily speaks will stay with him forever. Chapter 14, Before Everything Changes. The move to Evelyn's house happened on a Saturday morning. It was a small, unhurried thing. Evelyn Marsh stood at her front door in a blue cardigan, her silver hair neat, her expression warm and undemanding. She had set up the 2 spare rooms with clean linens and small, thoughtful details. A yellow lamp in Lily's room because Daniel had mentioned, quietly, that Lily liked the color yellow. When Lily walked through the front door and saw that lamp, she stopped. She looked up at Evelyn. "That's my color," she said seriously. Evelyn smiled. "I know," she said. "It's yours." Lily took Emily's hand and walked inside like she had been there before. The first week was quiet in the way that good things sometimes are. Emily slept more than she had in months. Evelyn cooked simple, warm meals and never asked more questions than necessary. In the evenings, Lily helped set the table and told Evelyn long, elaborate stories about her stuffed rabbit's adventures, and Evelyn listened to every word with complete attention. Daniel visited twice that week, not officially, just to check in, the way a person does when they have decided that a case has become something more than a case. Emily was steadier, still tired, still careful, still watchful, but steadier. He was glad to see it. On the 8th night, he got the call. It was Evelyn, her voice calm but clear. "Emily's asking for you," she said. "I think it's time." Daniel was in his car in 11 minutes. The hospital was quiet at that hour. The corridors had the particular stillness of a place that never fully sleeps. Daniel walked quickly and found Evelyn in the waiting area, sitting upright with her hands folded and her expression composed. "She's been asking for you since we left the house," Evelyn said. "She won't say it, but she's frightened." Daniel nodded. A nurse led him to the room. Emily was in the bed, her face pale, her hands gripping the rail on one side. A young nurse was beside her, speaking in a low, reassuring voice. The room smelled like antiseptic and something floral. Someone had placed a small bunch of daisies on the windowsill. Evelyn's doing, probably. Emily looked up when Daniel came in. Something in her face shifted. Not relief, exactly, something quieter than that. The particular expression of a person who has been waiting for someone they trust and has just seen them walk through the door. Daniel pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down. "I'm here," he said simply. Emily looked at him for a moment. Then she looked at the ceiling. "I'm scared," she said, straight out. "No armor around it." "That makes complete sense," Daniel said. "You're allowed to be scared." She was quiet for a moment. The machines beside the bed made soft, steady sounds. Then Emily reached out and gripped the side rail a little tighter. "Daniel," she said. "Right here," he said. "Please don't let them take my sister." Her voice was low and steady, but beneath it was everything. Every night she had spent watching over Lily. Every morning she had made something out of nothing. Every time she had held herself together when there was no one else to hold her. Daniel leaned forward. "Lily is safe at Evelyn's right now," he said. "She is sleeping in her room with her rabbit and her yellow lamp, and she will be there when you're ready to see her. That is not going to change." Emily looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded, and she closed her eyes and she let the night move forward. Emily has faced her greatest fear, and now, on the other side of the longest night, something new is beginning. Chapter 15, the final chapter, brings the morning that makes everything worth it. Chapter 15, the first day. The baby arrived just before dawn, a boy, small and pink and absolutely perfect, with a full head of dark hair and a cry that filled the room like something long overdue, like a sound the world had been waiting to hear. The nurse placed him in Emily's arms, and Emily, who had been strong for so long, who had held everything together through sheer will and love and stubbornness, finally came undone in the best possible way. She cried. Not the silent, careful crying Daniel had seen on that bench in October. This was different. This was the kind of crying that comes when something breaks open not from pain, but from fullness, from a heart that has been carrying so much for so long that it doesn't quite know what to do when something purely good arrives. Daniel stood near the door, giving her space. He looked at the window where the first pale light of morning was beginning to show at the edge of the sky. He thought about a concrete bench, 2 girls, an October wind. He thought about a calendar on a wall, a notebook full of lists. He thought about Lily's voice asking, "Are you going to take Emily away?" He stood there quietly and let himself feel the full weight of how far they had all traveled to reach this room. Lily met her nephew that afternoon. Evelyn brought her to the hospital, and Lily walked into the room with the particular solemnity of a 4-year-old who has been told that something very important is happening and has decided to take that seriously. She climbed carefully onto the bed beside Emily. She looked at the baby for a long moment. Then she looked up at her sister. "He's very small," she said. "He'll get bigger," Emily said. Lily considered this. "Does he like yellow?" she asked. Emily laughed. A real laugh, open and warm and completely unguarded. "We'll find out," she said. Lily nodded seriously and reached out one small finger to touch the baby's hand. The baby's fingers closed around hers instinctively, the way newborns do. Lily's eyes went wide. "Emily," she whispered. "He's holding me." "I know," Emily whispered back. Daniel watched from the doorway and said nothing at all. Months passed. Emily entered the Young Mothers program and attended every session. She earned her equivalency certificate the following spring with the highest score in her group. Dr. Tate called Daniel personally to tell him Lily thrived at Evelyn's house. She started kindergarten in September and came home every day with drawings, mostly of gardens and yellow lamps, and a family of 4 that was hers. Sandra Calloway completed a residential support program and began, slowly and carefully, to rebuild a relationship with her daughters. It was not simple, it was not fast, but it was real. And the baby, Emily named him Eli, grew. Daniel saw them on a Sunday in November, a year almost exactly from the afternoon on the bench. Emily was sitting in the park near the community center, Eli asleep in a stroller beside her. Lily was running across the grass, her arms out, her face turned up to the pale winter sun. Emily looked up when she heard his footsteps on the path. She looked well, rested in a way she hadn't been before. Still serious, still watchful, but lighter, as if something she had been carrying for years had finally been set down in a safe place. "How's he doing?" Daniel asked, nodding at Eli. "Perfect," Emily said simply. "He likes yellow, by the way." Lily was very pleased. Daniel smiled. They sat together for a moment in comfortable quiet, watching Lily chase something invisible across the grass. Then Emily looked at him. "You were the first person who looked at us," she said softly, "and actually saw us." Daniel looked at this young woman, a year older, a lifetime wiser, holding her future in both hands, and felt something settle in his chest, something quiet and complete. "Everyone deserves at least one person who does," he said. Lily ran back across the grass and threw herself onto the bench between them, breathing hard and laughing. Eli stirred in the stroller and made a small sound, and the four of them sat together in the thin November sunlight. A young mother, her sister, her son, and an old policeman who had stopped his car on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon and decided to pay attention. Sometimes that is all it takes. One person, one moment, one choice to stop and truly see. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And remember, there are people around us every day who are waiting for someone to notice. Be that person. Chapter 15. Complete. The story of Emily, Lily, Eli, and Daniel Harper is now complete.